Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm going to wait probably another 10 to 15 seconds before we get started to make sure everybody is logged in. So just sit tight. Thanks. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Once again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Sharing the Sun, Community Solar Deployment, Subscription Savings, and Energy Burden Reduction. My name is Jackie Petrie from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. If at any point you have any technical difficulties, feel free to send me a message in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I will help you address those issues. Speaking of questions, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So if at any point during the presentation you have questions, feel free to submit those using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you try to submit questions about the presentation in the Q&A box instead of the chat, but we will monitor both just in case. I also want to just make everyone aware that we are recording today's presentation. We will make a link to the recording available in the next couple days. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Nicole Steele, Senior Advisor at the U.S. Department of Energy. Then we'll hear from Jenny Heater, Senior Energy Analyst of Market and Policy Analysis at NREL. We'll be joined by Kaifang Xu, Researcher of Market and Policy Analysis at NREL. And finally, we'll be joined by Gabriel Chan, Associate Professor at University of Minnesota. So with that, I would like to hand things over to our first guest speaker, Jenny Heater.
Thanks, Jackie, for kicking us off, and thanks everybody for joining today. Can move on to the next slide, Jackie. I'm just going to set the stage for what we're planning to cover today during the webinar and then pass it off to our next presenter. So today we'll be talking about the National Community Solar Partnership. It's a partnership that is focused on expanding the community solar market across the country. Nicole Steele will review that partnership program with us. Secondly, I'll be covering community solar market status. This is based on data that NREL collects about community solar projects across the country. Then we'll turn it over to talk about equitable community solar, so how states and utilities are looking at low and moderate income focused community solar projects and programs. And finally, we'll focus on the subscriber value proposition. So this is looking at how much are customers saving when they subscribe to community solar, and what is some of the potential energy burden reduction from community solar subscriptions. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I will encourage folks to submit their questions along the way. We'll be taking all the questions at the end, but feel free to type in your question at any time. And with that, I will turn it over to Nicole Steele for a review of the National Community Solar Partnership.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here today and be part of this conversation. As Jenny and Jackie said, I am Nicole Steele. I'm from the U.S. Department of Energy. I am in the solar office and really lead a team on workforce and equitable access, including the National Community Solar Partnership. So that really is a lens to the work of NCSP. So if you can go to the next slide. I want to set the stage in terms of, today we're talking about sharing the sun and the market trends, and the work that goes behind that really is part of the National Community Solar Partnership and helps inform the work that we do, the decision making, roadmap development, metric tracking, everything. And so I really want to give a huge shout out to the team on the call today that has been working on the Sharing the Sun initiative for a number of years now. So for those of you who are not familiar with NCSP, it is a coalition of stakeholders really working to enable community solar and make it affordable and accessible to all Americans. Some of you may have heard that we launched a new goal, or a new target, I should say, just a couple of weeks ago. And that goal is to enable community solar to power an equivalent of 5 million households with $1 billion in savings by 2025. And as part of that, we want to make sure that we are also giving a nod to prioritizing the other benefits that come along to community solar, such as increased resiliency, workforce development, and bill reduction. On top of the Sharing the Sun initiative, NCSP also has an online network. Well, it's online the last year or so, and it's also in person sometimes. But we have a Mobilize community, which is a platform within our website that allows our 700 plus stakeholders, over 500 organizations in nearly all 50 states, engage with one another, share resources, share events, develop working groups. And we really see this peer exchange as an incredible opportunity for folks in the community solar space to ask questions, not only of DOE and the labs, but also each other. So that's an important element. We also have increased collaboration. So when we go into that group and when we work with stakeholders, when we see shared barriers and stakeholders looking to work together, we create what is called collaboratives. Today we have 2 collaboratives, active collaboratives, one focused on multifamily affordable housing and one focused on municipal utilities. And really the goal is to figure out, or unlock the barriers to community solar deployment within those stakeholder groups who have unique issues to themselves. And then lastly, we also have a technical assistance program, a direct technical assistance program. About a month ago, the program went rolling, which means it is available at any time to any National Community Solar Partnership member. And so if you do go on our website and join, there is a short application to access our technical assistance advisors. And those are advisors both at NREL, so National Renewable Energy Lab, and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, as well as a number of external third-party advisors to really dig in and help figure out what your individual barrier is to community solar, from program design to pro forma development to just figuring out what your portfolio looks like. So if we go to the next slide. I just want to talk a little bit more about what this goal means and how it really is creating the North Star to all of this work. So today, there is approximately 600,000 households served by community solar, or in 3 gigawatts of community solar. Our goal to deploy an equivalent of 5 million households is nearly a 700% increase to approximately 20 gigawatts of community solar in the next 4 years, so by 2025. And then the $1 billion in savings is really a nod to the increase in bill reduction. We released a request for information earlier this year, and what we heard as part of that process is that a meaningful bill reduction particularly for LMI households, low to moderate income households, we need to be setting a target for a 20% bill reduction. And so today is an average of 10%, and we're looking to support an increase to an average of 20% as part of that goal over the next 4 years. So next slide. And clearly we need to have a pathway to success to get those goals. Everyone here on this webinar today is part of that success. Every partner as part of NCSP is part of that success. And the more we can get folks engaged in our direct technical assistance program, ensuring that there are hospitable regulatory environments at the state level, that folks have access to financing, consumer acquisition and management is managed in a way or available in a way that makes sense and fair. And then also, how are we talking about community solar? The hearts and minds piece. What does community solar actually mean? Why should folks care? What does it mean to them? And so really being thoughtful about, how we are engaging key messengers and spokespeople, and just how we talk about community solar moving forward is going to be a big piece of that puzzle of, you know, not only deployment, but interest in accessing shares to community solar. So I hope that everyone on this call today is a member of NCSP, and if you're not already, I noticed Jenny put the link in the chat, and so please do take advantage of joining, and we'll talk soon. So I'm going to hand it back over to Jenny now, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation on the markets, trends, and everything else. So thanks everyone, and we'll talk soon.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Yes, and I did drop a link in the chat. So if folks are not partners already, please go there for more information. I'm going to talk now about market status for community solar. This data is all collected at NREL with support from University of Minnesota, so that we can understand really what is happening to this market over time, what are the differences in different state markets, and what are the different project characteristics that we're seeing for community solar projects. I can move to the next slide, please. Before I get started looking at some of this data, I want to just set the stage for how we define community solar as part of our data collection effort. We know that community solar can mean different things to different people. Some people, have different definitions that might focus on a certain size of project or certain location relative to the subscribers. For purposes of our definition, we do not set a size threshold. But we do set criteria related to the project must be subscribed by multiple entities. Those entities must voluntarily take action to subscribe. And we do require that the subscribers have some sort of mechanism to credit them for their subscription. So we distinguish community solar from other programs such as green tariffs or green pricing programs, which don't meet those same criteria. So that said, when we look at these projects across the country, we do have about 3,200 megawatts of capacity installed. This is over about 1,600 different projects across the country in 39 states and Washington, D.C. So very wide geography, but when you look at deployment by state, which we'll talk about a little bit more, you can see from this map that there are certain clusters of project activity happening. We do notice as well that there are states where we see larger projects, so not as many, but many fewer large projects, and then some states where we have clusters of smaller projects. Some of that is dependent on the state regulatory environment, and some is just happening based on different contexts of those state environments. Next slide. So we track growth year to year in the community solar market. NREL has been tracking this market for a long time. We have projects going back to even pre-2010, but really most of the growth has happened in recent years on a capacity basis. Overall, cumulative capacity has grown by about 121% year over year since 2010. If you think of this a different way, it means that capacity has more than doubled on average year over year. So quite a lot of growth. In the last year, in 2020 alone, we had about 1.1 gigawatts come online. So we continue to see a lot of growth in this market year over year. Next slide, please. So we also look at trends by project size. We have noticed that over time, the average project capacity has increased. We do see that we're seeing states where very large projects are coming online. Those are not shown in the plot on the right, but if they were there, they would skew these figures quite a bit. We've seen projects that are over 50 megawatts in size come online in some of our southern states. But generally what we notice is that we see an average around this kind of 2 megawatt threshold. Some of that is driven by state policy environments, which have limited the size of an eligible community solar project, or other state environments or utility environments where there's a requirement that projects be connected on the distribution grid. Next slide. So a lot of the deployment across the country is driven by state context. We saw early on in the community solar market that Colorado was an early state leader. The program expanded in 2011 and in 2015. But when you look at recent deployment, those 2010 and 2015 expansions seem relatively small. We saw a second wave where Massachusetts and Minnesota expanded their capacity pretty significantly in the 2016 to 2019 timeframe. And then more recently, we're seeing states like Florida as well as New York emerge in recent years. So Florida has seen large projects installed through Florida Power and Lights program. New York has rolled out its state incentive program, which we expect to see more capacity coming online in future years as well. Next slide. So one of the more recent additions to our data set this year and our analysis this year has been looking at ownership of community solar projects. So we gather data on a project by project basis and wanted to get a sense of who are the entities involved in these types of projects. So we have looked at whether the project is run by a third party, by a municipal or cooperative utility, a generation and transmission or joint action authority, a vertically integrated utility, customer owned, or a rep-owned project. You will see from these trends that the project count is dominated by third parties. Capacity is also dominated by third parties, but falling behind that is the vertically integrated utilities. This includes the programs like Florida Power and Light that have a large amount of capacity per project. So we'll be continuing to track data in this way and get a better understanding of who are the entities involved with community solar development. One thing I think we're increasingly interested in is this customer-owned projects or projects that are not using a third party to finance and develop their project. Next slide. So I will turn it over to Kai now to talk about some of our state policy environment and equitable community solar.
Okay, thank you so much, Jenny. So I'm going to be talking about something like element that supports the community solar deployment. First and foremost, it's about like the legislation things. As you can see this chart on the right, currently at least like 22 states plus Washington, D.C. have passed like some form of like a legislation enabling community solar. This could be like either through like state required program or just like the authorization of a limited number of like a pilot project. So I just wanted to mention like all those policies just like varies by states and as well as those programs. One thing like some big updates for the FY21 is like, for example, New Mexico had passed like Senate Bill 84 to like enabling community solar. So we'll like keep tracking all those policies and hopefully in the future, like more states gonna to have more policies enabling community solars. And the next slide, please. Like besides the legislation concern, I think like a voluntary-based programs also like support the community solar deployment. As this one says, like for example, Florida, Arizona, Georgia, like Texas, currently they have like lots of like voluntary-based community solar program. This has contributed to almost 80% of overall like states without legislation. And if you can see these figures on the right, it's just like the voluntary-based programs can contribute almost like 30% or even more of like all the community solar deployment. For example, like Florida have like deployed like over 500 megawatts project since 2018, and they're going to build like a more and more capacities in the future. All those like voluntary-based programs led by either utility or some just like pilots have also like contributed a lot. And next slide, please. So Jenny has like a cover like what currently the market looks like for the community solar deployment. It says the US currently has deployed like 3 gigawatts of community solar project, but like how about the future? So this chart just show you based on our studies what community solar are going to look like in the near future. As of 2020, there's 5 states like Colorado, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, and Florida. Those 5 states have been driving the majority of community solar deployment, both in like installation and the project like in planning. So if you can see like the light blue colors refers to like a project like in Q, it's like indicate a community solar project. It's like under construction or like project awarded and going to actually come online in less than like 3 years. This number is quite huge. It's about like 5 gigawatts. And also like some states like Minnesota, Oregon, New Hampshire, Illinois, and Hawaii, currently they don't have like lots of community solar deployed, but like they also have lots of project in queue. We estimate those states have like over 1 gigawatt will come online. Next slide, please. So next section, we're going to talk about like share another study on like equitable community solar. So this section was to discuss like how various policy and market factors shape the deployment of serving the LMI customers for this community solar project. Yeah, next slide. So as you may notice, like community solar has its own advantages. It's like many community solar customers subscribe on a monthly basis rather than like pay one-time upfront payments. This makes like a community solar can like provide more solar access to some like the disadvantaged customers, such like low and moderate income people, help them to get like more solar access. And we identified there are at least 4 general approaches to encourage such like solar access. First one is like a policy mandate. Second one is like financial incentives. Third one is like LMI requirements or like multi-family solar things. And the fourth one is like voluntary utility lead programs. As you see this map on the right, you can see like this is all this like LMI related program legislations looks like currently across the entire US. And lots of like states, they actually have like a multiple different approaches to encourage some the equitable community solar deployment. For example, like in the Colorado, they have both like LMI mandates and as well as some like financial incentives. In California, they also have like a mandate on LMI, and they also have like a multi-family solar, the multi-family solar requirements and incentives to increase this solar access. Next slide, please. So currently there are not a lot of like LMI dedicated community solar deployment or like an operation online. And we go through some like the top states based on these programs and do some like preliminary statistics. Like at least like 26 megawatt of community solar dedicated to the LMI participants have been installed. And we also look at the capacities in Q, like by the end of 2020, we estimate like those 10 states on the figures, just like at least like over 200 of like pending capacities. So based on this figure, since currently it's just like our first year studies, in the next year, we're going to look at more detailed for like all this LMI community solar deployment in the entire US. And we are also going to have like very detailed project research on the program level to hopefully give you guys like more detailed information. And the next slide, please. So then I will hand this to Gabe talking about like the community solar subscriber value proposition.
Hey, thanks, Kai. As Kai said, we're going to dig into a bit here our analysis of community solar subscriptions. So in addition to the project data that Jenny and Kai described, we've also been collecting, to the extent possible, data on community solar subscriptions, which vary quite a bit. And we've taken a lot of care to model those subscriptions. Go to the next slide. In part of that modeling, what we're doing is we're looking to collect contracts and match them to specific projects. Currently, we've matched individual contracts to 403 specific projects. And then we have an additional 1,000 or so projects, which are in programs, mostly state legislated programs, or also other utility voluntary programs, for which we have contracts for some projects within that program, or projects generally within that program. And then we build a pretty straightforward cash flow model that allows us to see the annual returns, given some assumptions, of that community solar subscription. And from that, calculate a one number summary of that cash flow, or a net present value of those subscription contracts. But as many folks who are in the business of developing community solar projects, or who are regulating or creating these programs, you know that there's a lot of uncertainty, well, there can be a lot of uncertainty in the value of community solar subscriptions. There's a few key things that a community solar subscription's value depends on. One is many community solar subscriptions that depend on, the value of them depends on the rate at which utility rates escalate. So for example, reimbursement under a community solar subscription could be based off of retail rates, or pegged to it. And so we look at different scenarios of how retail rates will escalate over time, looking at between 1.5% annual growth and 3.5% annual growth. Also, community solar subscription value depends on the amount of solar produced at the solar project under most subscription contract designs. And so we also have to model how over the life of the subscription contract, production will change. And then finally, the discount rate, which is a standard economic assumption about how to trade off the relative value of near-term versus long-term costs and savings. And we look at a variety of scenarios of discount rates from 8.4% to 4.4%. All right, next slide. So in our modeling, we have standard contract assumptions. In particular, there's some community solar subscription contracts have more or less flexibility. Some require, a 20-year contract, for example, and some are year to year, month to month even. And so we use some standard assumptions to put on an apples to apples basis how we're comparing contracts in terms of their length, in terms of how we model that flexibility. For retail rates, we're pulling from the utility rate database as well as the Energy Information Administration. And for PV production, we've worked with the NREL tool, the System Advisor Model, or SAM, to model projects. We're also assuming in order to model production from projects, particularly for subscription contracts that are based on capacity, that production will be based off of tracking for projects that are above 1 megawatt, and will be fixed tilt for projects below. Tracking essentially allows projects, allows any kind of solar project, whether they're community solar or not, to get more production by essentially rotating the panels depending on the time of day and the position of the sun. So our model, we have sensitivities. Obviously, in order to understand value of community solar contracts, we're going to have some amount of uncertainty. And so to account for that uncertainty, we conduct sensitivity analysis across all of those variables I just outlined. All right, next slide. So with all that said, we're able to capture a sizable portion of the market. Overall, we're able to assess about 80% of projects throughout the entire data set that Jenny and Kai described. There are still projects that we have not been able to collect contracts for. And so if you're in the business of developing projects, you may have heard from someone from the NREL team asking for some of your data. And I would encourage you, if you have heard from folks, that we're always happy to take and process additional data. But right now, what I'll be showing is coverage of about 80% of the national community solar market. All right, next slide. So with all of those caveats said, what do we actually find? We find that the median net present value of subscriptions has been positive since 2016. In some of the initial years of community solar development, where we were tracking data all the way back to 2014, we saw that a lot of community solar subscriptions were premium products with a negative net present value. But since 2016, over 50% of the market has positive net present value. And we've seen a pretty stable value in contracts that have been offered in 2018, 2019, and 2020. In particular, a lot of the stability has been driven by states that have something that is pretty close to virtual net metering or a stable tariff structure, particularly Colorado, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and New York. have all had relatively stable tariff structures since about 2017. Just for a bit of interpretation here, we're showing net present value here in terms of dollar per watt. Dollar per watt is a nice standard metric that's really helpful for a lot of folks who are deep in the weeds of energy policy. A dollar per watt net present value is something that we can use and interpret pretty easily. But for those of you who are maybe less familiar with this metric, a good rule of thumb is that you can think of a dollar per watt here. So take our 2020 estimate of 26 cents per watt. You can interpret that as approximately $26 per kilowatt per year. And so if a household, let's say, has a 10 kilowatt subscription, which is pretty large, you could think of that as $260 per year as what we call an annuity equivalent. So just for a bit of interpretation there, 26 cents per watt is roughly equivalent to $26 per kilowatt per year. All right, next slide. So we've been doing some work, as Kai mentioned, to put community solar into context, particularly for low-income households. This is an example of some of the analysis that we're scaling up related to evaluating community solar subscription contracts for low-income households. So here's a lot of information on this slide. I'll break it down slowly here. We're looking at, in this slide, an example calculation for the state of Massachusetts. In the state of Massachusetts, we find that across all the projects, the median project has a net present value of 15 cents per watt. If we turn that into an annuity equivalent, as I mentioned earlier, this is roughly equivalent to 14 or so dollars per kilowatt per year. Meaning that in Massachusetts, community solar that we've been tracking there, those subscription contracts are offering value of about $14 per kilowatt per year. But what does that mean for the average household or the average low-income household? So we've asked the question of what if households in Massachusetts cover 100% of their average electric load with the average community solar subscription? We find that if, and we've shown here how that changes the total energy bills for those households. And then finally, we've expressed that in terms of energy burden. Energy burden is defined as the percentage of gross household income spent on energy costs. And it includes not just electricity, but also natural gas and delivered fuels. Does not include transportation. The Department of Energy has created a very useful tool called the LEAD tool, which has a very nice interactive data browser. We've scraped that data, pulled it from the LEAD tool to look at how energy burden changes with a community solar subscription. And so what we find is that for a low-income household, that's at 0 to 30% of area median income, energy burden for those households without community solar is 16.5%, meaning that low-income households spend 16.5% of their income on energy. And with community solar, that average community solar subscription of 15 cents per watt or $14 per kilowatt per year, a community solar subscription that covers the entire energy bill for a low-income household drops from 16.5% to 16.0%. But Massachusetts also has a low-income adder. Their state policy provides 6 cents per kilowatt hour for community solar subscriptions that predominantly serve low-income households. And with that adder, that lowers energy burden now from 16% to 13.3%. And so with this analysis, what we're showing here is across all those income brackets in the bar chart on the right, in blue, energy burden without community solar. In orange, energy burden with the typical community solar subscription. And then in green, energy burden with the typical community solar subscription and the low-income adder. And we've just shown that for low-income households at either 0 to 30% of area median income or 30 to 60% area median income. So this starts to help to connect the dots with some of the data that we're collecting and the broader goals for low-income access to community solar that we kicked off the webinar with. All right, and then with that, the next slide is additional resources for where we are in terms of publications. And then I think we're going to turn it over to Q&A now.
Great. Thank you, Gabe, and the rest of our speakers. We do have a number of questions popping up, so I will go ahead and go through those. Let's see. One question asks, who are third parties that account for the majority of community solar capacity?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So third parties are, in this case, usually solar project developers that are merging into the community solar market. If you've heard of companies like Nexamp or Pivot, these are companies that really develop their projects, and in some cases may be subscribing folks as well, or they may rely on another organization to handle that subscription. But it's not the utility, and it's not some other energy supplier.
Thanks, Jenny. I know that a couple of our speakers are answering these questions, but in the interest of making sure questions and answers are captured for those listening to the recording, I'm going to go ahead and read some of those that have already been answered, just so everybody knows. We had a question that asks, what is the largest 100% LMI project in the country right now?
Kai, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. I just like send out like a message, but I can repeat like we only got like a few 100% LMI project data actually available publicly. For example, like Excel Energy in Colorado, they have like deployed like a few 100% community solar project as of 2020. Project size is not very huge. Most of them just like less than 2 megawatts. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just maybe add on to that, yeah, we do commonly see that LMI is a portion of a project. So while we do have some very large projects like the Florida Power and Light projects that have an LMI portion, it's not an individual project that is 100% LMI. So yeah, we definitely see that distinction in the market right now.
Thanks. We had a question, and Gabe, you responded, but again, I'm going to read the question for everybody who's tuning in later. How do most projects manage subscribers, whether developer or utility, and what are the main costs associated with managing these subscribers? And Gabe, I think you also shared a resource for that as well.
Yeah, for that question, it varies. A lot of developers have a subscription management software that they'll use. Utilities also will use platforms, such as Salesforce to manage subscribers. There are certainly costs associated with that. I threw a reference to a study that GTM Research, now Wood Mackenzie, did a few years ago, where they did a survey to quantify that. And it's on page 67 of that report, which I think is also on the NCSP platform.
Thanks, Gabe. Next question asks, any comments on how to structure an LMI participation agreement so as to provide a low price guarantee so that someone signing up today doesn't get locked into an agreement which ends up costing more in the future relative to options available in the future? And how can the developer be backstopped to avoid assuming this risk?
Gabe, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that this is an important question here. I think that some of the risks, particularly over time, are real, and different states have thought about these issues of consumer protection differently. I think a lot depends on state policy. I know that in some states like New York, there's more involvement in trying to guarantee some of those savings. But I think it really depends on the state context. And I might invite Kai or Jenny to add to that.
I don't have much more additional to this one, but this is really a great question. I think we can definitely look at that in our this year's study. Yeah.
Yeah, I know there are some states that have required, LMI customers to save a certain amount as kind of a baseline requirement for offering a product to that customer group. And then, yeah, a lot of states, we have done some work looking at the consumer protections that are required for community solar. There are a bunch of states who have mandatory disclosures to customers about how much money they will be saving or are estimated to save, so that customers hopefully are informed when they're making a decision about whether to subscribe. And I know there are more states looking at that space and trying to understand what are the right types of disclosures, what do customers need to know, and how should that information be conveyed so that people actually absorb it, instead of just glossing over a long information sheet with lots of terms they don't understand.
Yeah, I'd say maybe one more thing just to add to that too is in some states like in Minnesota here, there's a recent study ordered around consolidated billing, which I think also relates to some of these issues about what's the visibility and communication around community solar, and what are the opportunities to think through a single billing versus the two bill situation a lot of community solar finds itself in.
Thanks, Gabe. Next question asks, any particular initiatives and or group efforts to promote CS in Southern California SDGE region?
I'm not aware of anything in particular. California's IOUs do have flavors of community solar that to date have not seen a lot of deployment happen because of how those programs and policies are structured. So I don't know if there's any active organization trying to coordinate in that service territory, but I would encourage you to join the National Community Solar Partnership if you're not already a member. We do have a platform where you could put a question out to that group of more than 600 folks to see who might be active in California.
Thanks, Jenny. Next question asks, which states have the right policy to support the growth of community solar projects?
Yeah, I can take this one. And this is often a tricky one because policy environments vary so much state to state. But when we look at past trends, we see, states that are leading deployment have some common things in place. One is just a mechanism to support community solar. So whether that's a mandate for community solar or a mandate that virtual net metering be offered, that fundamental framework in place. The other big piece is how subscribers are compensated. So typically this is done at the retail rate, but some states offer a rate that might be pegged to a value of solar, as in Minnesota, where the production is valued in terms of what it provides to the grid and the environment. Other states offer some sort of incentive based on other things, but Massachusetts, for example, has a framework to incentivize community solar projects. So those are the two biggest variables we see. There's a lot of stuff in the weeds as well around how easy it is for subscriber organizations to enroll people or modify their contracts or add new subscribers, things like that. But the biggest pieces are around that enabling legislation and the credit mechanism. Gabe or Kai, feel free to weigh in on that one as well.
I think you have covered everything I want to discuss. Yeah.
Thanks, Jenny. Next question, have you seen any trends or have an outlook regarding a rising utility customer cost for CSS customers, including low income?
I am not sure. Gabe, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I'm seeing here. I think that this idea, would community solar raise cost of service or raise rates, is something that is discussed a lot. There's a lot of different discussion. Jenny had mentioned the value of solar and the value distributed energy resource framework, which tries to compensate only at the avoided costs. But certainly there are a lot of complications in trying to implement those, as several NREL reports have documented some of the important considerations and how to think about compensation for distributed generation, including community solar, but also more generally in a way that aligns with cost of service. And I think Minnesota's experience, New York's experience in implementing these programs shows that it's complicated and there are a lot of assumptions involved in that kind of analysis. It's not something that we've tracked here, but certainly more generally, as we looked at the markets, this is something that a lot of the particularly more mature markets have really tried to get their heads around, I'll say.
Great, thank you, Gabe. Is there a comparative analysis on the best way to structure incentives for LMIs within a state or within a utility program?
I can talk about some analysis that we did for 5 states in Washington, D.C., as well as Hawaiian Electric, where we did use a tool by Elevate Energy, which models community solar subscriptions. We then modified that to look at different subscription types. So having a low income subscription structure paired with a non-low income subscription structure. What we tried to analyze in that case was if we want to assume that low income customers need to save more than non-low income customers, what do those values need to be, or what should they look like? And so we could model out things to help states or utilities answer, if I offer an incentive of 5 cents a kilowatt hour to LMI projects or LMI subscribers, what does that mean in terms of savings to those customers? What does that mean in terms of costs that maybe need to be recovered from other customers or other pots of funding? So I can post a link to that analysis as well in the chat. But I would say in general, a lot of work has been done in that space through the National Community Solar Partnership, where we do provide technical assistance to utilities, states, other entities trying to figure out what's the best structure for their individual program. So if that person does have a particular need for that type of analysis, please be in touch or go ahead and submit a request for technical assistance.
Thanks, Jenny. Next question asks, is NREL tracking any state level policy tools used to address community acceptance of solar projects, such as requirements of ownership, job training, or involving the community in the siting proceedings?
We are not tracking in that level of detail. We have been tracking policies in terms of, LMI requirements. Some of those are starting to verge into ownership requirements, like some new legislation in Illinois, but we have not been comprehensively tracking that. We have looked at some unique case studies of workforce related requirements or job training stuff, but we have not been tracking that comprehensively.
Great. Next question asks, to what extent is the growth of the national community solar market driven by changes in state law or policy, such as incentives or tax credits, versus other market forces?
First, it's hard to quantify this policy driven and other market forces. Like I mentioned in my previous slide deck, it's just almost over 60% of these community solar deployment in the US was actually built in the states, have at least some of the community solar legislation. Others lots of driven by the voluntary program. Yeah. Jenny and Gabe, just feel free if you have any additional comments. Yeah.
No, I think that's spot on, and you see that in play. You know, when we look at community solar compared to rooftop PV. So some states like California have, you know, really accelerated their rooftop PV programs, but are, you know, less advanced in their community solar programs. Other states we see, like Florida has a ton of community solar, but less rooftop PV. So there can be different dynamics at play between those different markets.
Thanks. Next question asks, which are the states that have no limit on project size to participate in community solar? Jenny, you referred to some states with a 50 megawatt community solar project. What is the reasoning behind state policies that put a cap on project capacity to participate in community solar?
Yeah, so I don't have the list memorized. We used to have a slide on this, I think actually on limits to project size. Yeah, so definitely there are some states that do not have a limit. In particular, states that have no enabling policy. So like Florida and Arkansas, there's no enabling policy. So it's really just up to the utility to propose a program and get it approved by their regulator. So in those cases, you know, we're not seeing a limit set by the state. It may be part of that negotiated settlement or a negotiated agreement between stakeholders, but there's no legislated limit. In terms of, you know, the fundamentals of why a state might place a capacity limit on project size, I think this really comes down to, you know, what folks feel like is community solar, or what type of project do they think is relevant to this market. And in general, I think there's some agreement that smaller projects are located on the distribution grid. They are maybe located closer to where folks are subscribing, so they have more of that community feel compared to, you know, larger projects that may be more remote from where subscribers are. But yeah, I would say every state, you know, has their own process of coming to a number and whether there's a number, and really a lot of that comes down to stakeholders in that state and what their perspectives are on how to define community solar.
Jenny, I think that ties into this next question, which is asking, is there a central resource available that compiles various definitions of community solar and how they compare and contrast? And is there a definition of community solar appropriate for permitting of new residential and commercial buildings served by community solar?
Yeah, that's a great question. I might actually punt this one over to Gabe, since I know he's done more writing on community solar and kind of adjacent programs.
Yeah, there are a lot of definitions of community solar, and there are certainly many projects called community solar that would not be included in our database. For example, there was a report from a few years ago from the Clean Energy States Alliance and other authors that has a box in it that talks about, you know, what is community solar and how do different groups define community solar differently. One of the examples that would not be included in our data set currently is solar projects that are installed on multifamily housing behind the meter. Our definition of community solar that we're using for data collection purposes is really focused on community solar that operates through the grid, where the subscriptions are opt-in and the project is off-site. When projects are behind the meter and there's one big master meter at a multifamily housing, that you know, it doesn't fit our definition, but according to other groups, that might be more community-based solar or perhaps shared solar as opposed to community solar. So there is, I think, quite a bit of definitional complexity. We do have a pretty firm and tight definition for our data collection purposes, but we also acknowledge there's a lot of innovation out there and thinking about how to more generally meet the goals of community solar through more generally sharing the benefits or the costs of solar installation without necessarily working through a community shared solar approach which does, according to our definition, require that use of the grid for a project offsite and opt in to that project's value.
Awesome, thanks, Gabe. Next question. Once a project is developed, how does NREL support community solar projects and owners? Who are the third-party owners indicated in the graph? And let me know if you want me to go back to any slides to show those graphs.
No, I think we can just talk about it. And yeah, we did get the question about third-party owners at the beginning as well. So yeah, these are, you know, the folks that are not, they're not a utility, they're not a retail supplier. They are really a solar project developer. So these are often, you know, folks who have come from the solar market and are merging into community solar, Nexamp, Blue Wave, Clean Choice, companies like that are ones that might be familiar to folks. And yeah, the first part about how do we support projects once they are developed, you know, we really tend to focus on pre-development, so helping states and utilities create the right program or policy design, and then focusing on technical assistance through the National Community Solar Partnership to help those entities, you know, answer questions that they have in order to get to that project development stage. We tend to do less for projects that are actually, you know, already operating, other than collect data about where they are when they were operational, things like that.
Thanks, Jenny. I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to try to get through a couple more questions. This one asks, are there any programs specific to senior citizens that own their home, recognizing that those seniors have both low and fixed incomes? And will senior citizens be included with the community solar programs?
Kai, I don't know if you have thoughts on that one. I'm not familiar with, you know, programs specific to senior citizens.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of them just specify like senior person like can get like benefits from LMI. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I know there are rate discount programs. I'm not sure I've seen a community solar necessarily yet. They might be out there.
Okay, let's see. Are there any resources you'd recommend that show LMI customer payment performance or overall community solar payment performance?
I am not aware of anything. Yeah, Gabe or Kai, are you aware of anything?
Yeah. No.
And Jackie, I know there's one other, we've got a lot of questions we're not gonna be able to answer, but maybe if we could end on this one about a data set of community solar projects and the number of LMI households.
Yep.
So yeah, Kai walked through our summary data on LMI households and programs. So it sounds like there might be interest in, you know, having the underlying data for what was shared here. I think that's something we can definitely take back and think about for next year, but certainly please reach out to us if you have an immediate data need, because we do have a bunch of data on the back end that let us get to those estimates.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Just free to reach out, and I can work with you to the data collection. Yeah.
Great. And I think we're right at time. So Jenny, do you want to let people know where they'll be able to find slides and recording from today before we close out?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you everybody for joining. We will be posting slides and the recording to NREL's Community Solar page, which if you just Google NREL Community Solar, that's the easiest way to find it. We'll also be posting it to the Department of Energy's Community Solar page, and we will share those links as soon as they're available.
Thanks, Jenny. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to all of our speakers for the amazing presentation. Like Jenny said, we'll be sharing the webinar recording and slides in the next couple of days. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.